What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the Dolphins Deep Dive. Miami, for the second year in a row, comes in at the number 8 spot in my power rankings heading into the 2024 NFL season. That's not to say, though, that they didn't have some changes and that this might be a different team in many ways, even if they come in with the same power rankings. So a lot of stuff to talk about. We got a big Tua extension to hit on. So very much looking forward to this one. Before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button, it really does help me out. I really appreciate it. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of these deep dives and my regular season content just around the corner. I guess I will take just a second to remind you guys, I do have a podcast. It's the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. If you want my weekly game recaps on top of some other topical stuff, definitely go check it out. We'll see you over there. But let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at that Dolphins offseason. Definitely some shakeup with the coaching staff as well as some roster shakeup. But in terms of the coaching shakeup, they say goodbye to Vic Fangio. It actually didn't really work out. It's not that he did a horrible job there, but it just wasn't really a fit inside the locker room. And in terms of the results on the field, it was, it just kind of had its ups and downs. Overall, it was just kind of an average defense. They're looking for a little bit more here. They go and get Anthony Weaver, kind of trying to steal a little bit of that Mike McDonald magic from Baltimore. We'll break that whole system down when we get to the coaching segment. But I do say downgraded / to be determined. I think like on paper that looks downgraded, but I kind of have a gut feeling that this might be better. So I'm going to say to be determined. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, but no shakeup at quarterback. They extend Tua, so staying neutral there. At running back, I'm going to say neutral. I just don't know how much Jalen Wright is going to play this year, but a fun 4th-round pick nonetheless. At tight end, I will say slightly upgraded. They get another playmaker into the mix in Jonnu Smith, forever in a Shanahan-style offense. Now his stint in Miami begins. At wide receiver, I'm going to just say slightly upgraded, by name. Going from Cedric Wilson to Odell Beckham Jr. is obviously an upgrade, but, first off, they don't use their third wide receiver that much at all. Second off, Odell was fine last year. He had some good games in the middle of the season, but he's also injured coming into the year in what's kind of a mysterious deal. We don't really know if and when he's going to play. And Cedric Wilson was like a solid number 3 wide receiver for them. They just didn't really use him that much. But I think what sets it over to at least say slightly upgraded is I like the Malik Washington pick in the 6th round. But obviously not a big deal. They are focusing this around Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle for a good reason. But on the offensive line, this is the one unit that's like clearly downgraded that we've talked about so far. I mean, Robert Hunt, yes, he only played 52% of their snaps last year, dealt with some injuries, but he was a top 10 guard probably when he's playing. So that's a big loss, as well as Connor Williams, another guy that's dealt with injuries, but again, when he plays, a top 10 center in the NFL. So those are some big losses. And in the case of Robert Hunt, they ran out of money, right? In terms of additions, they do bring in Aaron Brewer, who's started a lot of games for Tennessee, and kind of a developmental toolsy tackle in Patrick Paul in the 2nd round. But I don't think anyone's really going to argue that the offensive line is even worse now moving forward. But then you look at the defense, and it's interesting. I think they got better on the back end of the defense, but up front, some losses and some injuries lead you to think that their defensive line will be, potentially much worse this year. Obviously, the loss of Christian Wilkins on the interior of the defensive line is a big deal. He was a massively paid free agent. I think outside of Kirk Cousins, the highest paid free agent on the market this year. And he played 82% of this team's snaps. That's a crazy amount for an interior defensive lineman. Those are huge, literally huge shoes to fill there. And then Raekwon Davis was one of the first guys off the bench. He got 45% of their snaps, a damn near rotational starter for them. So 2 players leaving, but they did bring in Calais Campbell If they were looking for a guy that can play a lot of snaps, Campbell was a good addition. Even though he's 38 years old, he still played like 800 snaps for the Falcons last year. It's just very rare for a defensive tackle to play that much and have the stamina to do it, especially at his age. It's a nice addition, but it's not Christian Wilkins. And then some other small flyers, Benito Jones, more of a nose tackle, and Jonathan Harris, more of a hybrid end type of player. But definitely downgraded on the interior of the defensive line. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. But then with the edge group, there's no other way to put it. This is just to be determined. I think there is potential for this to be an even better edge group than it was last year. I don't know if that's likely potential. You have both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb coming off of major injuries. Their availability is a concern, but also just the level of play that they're going to give you. Coming off an Achilles for Phillips and a second ACL injury for Bradley Chubb, it's just up in the air, right? They got Chubb for most of last season. They had Jalen Phillips for the first third of last season. So, if they're back out there healthy, balling, with the addition of Chop Robinson to kind of compensate for the loss of Andrew Van Ginkel a little bit, who goes to Minnesota, this could be better. But if Phillips and Chubb can't go or aren't 100%, this is a clear downgrade. So it's just completely to be determined on the edge. It is probably this team's biggest wild card this year is the health of those two players. And no one's going to shy away from that. That's not controversial to say that. But then at linebacker, they have some more movement here. Jerome Baker out and Jordan Brooks in as the starter. They give him a decent to large free agent contract to come over from Seattle. Those two guys kind of flip hands. Thought that was kind of funny. Jerome Baker heads to Seattle. And then Anthony Walker, a nice little depth add for them as well. So I do say upgraded. I think Brooks is a better player than Jerome Baker, and I like the depth add. At cornerback, and I like the depth addition of Anthony Walker. At cornerback, upgraded. Xavier Howard was pretty much burnt toast last year. He's gone, still a free agent. Nobody's signed him yet. Eli Apple as well was not good for this team. And they bring in Kendall Fuller, really underrated signing, maybe one of the most underrated additions of the offseason. Quietly my favorite move that this team made over the summer. But then at safety, a pair of guys that played a lot last year, Brandon Jones, Deshaun Elliott, both gone. Both are looking like starters for other teams, but I like the veteran addition of Jordan Poyer. I think he's better still than both Brandon Jones and Deshaun Elliott. And then they bring in Marcus May as well. He's had a falling off, but as a depth piece, sure, why not? So it's not a crazy upgrade, but I like it. I'm going to say slightly upgraded there. And then no change with the special teams. So again, there were aspects of this football team that got better. It's just an interesting offseason to me, though, because you look at how the season ended last year, where they just can't match the physicality in the cold weather in Kansas City, in the trenches, really just getting their teeth kicked in. And, a lot of teams look at how they lost in the playoffs and almost overcompensate to make sure that didn't happen again. The Dolphins were like, nope, this is who we are. Basically, we're just going to hope we don't have to go into freezing Kansas City again, and let's stay true to who we are and maximize our strengths and not worried about our weaknesses quite as much. I know you might say, oh, they spent a first-round pick on an edge rusher, a second-round pick on a tackle. I get that, but Paul is entirely developmental, and Chop Robinson, I'll just say, is not known for his physicality and run defense and strength at the line of scrimmage. So I don't know that those really were them addressing the issue necessarily. But it will be interesting to see how that kind of mentality plays out for this team. Rolling the dice in many ways. But let's transition to this coaching staff, led by Mike McDaniel, of course. And, this is the main reason that the Dolphins are a top 10 team in my power rankings. I just think Mike McDaniel's incredible. And if you want to ask, what offensive coordinators are truly elevating their offense strictly through the scheme, the play calls themselves, I think Mike McDaniel is unmatched in that regard. Not necessarily saying he is the best overall offensive coach. There's more that goes into this than just getting into the lab, drawing up some crazy shit that works on Sundays and taking the league by storm. It's a big part of it. But, there's other coaches that have shown maybe to be a little more adaptable. I think teams have been able to slowly figure out what Mike McDaniel is doing, and then his inability to kind of counterpunch late in the season certainly has shown up. And I would never call Mike McDaniel a one-trick pony, but I think a lot of other offenses are able to get a little bit more multiple and make themselves a little bit less matchup dependent against certain defenses and teams. But again, in terms of like who is drawing up the best plays, being the most creative and really elevating their offense through the scheme, I think Mike McDaniel is number one in that regard. And that's heavily reflected in my coach rankings here. I have him as the 5th overall head coach. I'm curious if you guys think that's too high. But in the pass game and run game coaching rankings, tied for 1st for pass game and 2nd to 3rd for run game coaching. I think it's very notable that it's not just the passing stuff that McDaniel does here that's working. The Dolphins were 3rd in rushing DVOA last year, quietly. So he's just really special in both phases of the game there. Now, in terms of what his offense is, we could have a deep dive within the deep dive, a whole iceberg episode on what Mike McDaniel's offense is. And I would love to do that someday, but it would be a multiple month type of project to really get into what the hell this offense is. But I will give you the kind of Spark Notes version, at least off of my understanding of it. And I'm also not afraid to admit, like, they run a lot of stuff that I just watch and admire and say, wow, that worked, but I have no idea what that was. And I think a lot of defensive coordinators watch and say the same thing and then have to figure out how to stop it on Sundays. But at its core, this is still a Shanahan-inspired offense, but it has completely gone off the rails in terms of creativity and looking different than a lot of the stuff Kyle's doing in San Francisco. Of course, McDaniel spent a decade under Kyle Shanahan with 4 different teams, so the influences there are clear, but McDaniel clearly had kind of stashed away a bunch of stuff that he wanted to try as soon as he got full reins of the offense, and he has not held back. But you do see the roots of that Shanahan tree, really in the sense that he loves to stay in big personnel. And in Miami, it's 21 personnel. A lot of teams, when they go big, it's 12 personnel, where the 2 is 2 tight ends. For Mike McDaniel, he likes to have a fullback out there, which you just don't see very often. And Alec Ingold was second to only Kyle Juszczyk in snaps played last season. And the Dolphins ran the 3rd least amount of 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers on the field. So they were behind only San Francisco and Atlanta, 2 very Shanahan-inspired offenses, obviously. But by staying in a bigger personnel, which is 2 wide receivers on the field, they're forcing the defense to make a choice. Do you come out in a base defense with 4 defensive backs, or do you come out in your nickel with 5 defensive backs? And that just puts a lot of pressure on the defense because, McDaniel, Shanahan, they are more than happy to pass the ball into the middle of the defense, into the teeth of the defense, even vertically. They're more than happy to throw the ball out of 12 or 21 personnel. And because of that, a lot of teams will match you with their nickel defense to account for a Tyreek Hill and a Jalen Waddle. And then you're getting a lighter box with bigger bodies where you're getting an advantage in the run game. So even if you don't have the best offensive line, which both Miami and San Francisco don't, you do have a size advantage most of the time and a personnel advantage in the run game. So those core elements are very much there. But in terms of the play calling, it's very different. Like, you start with the run game, where no run game in the league looks anything like what they do in Miami. It is technically a very zone forward blocking scheme. I think 2/3 of their runs were zone runs last year, but it's almost always still with someone coming cross formation or with some unique wrinkle, whether that's, instead of just running a wide zone handoff, they love to run that wide zone toss to just skip the handoff element, maximize that speed to the corner. They do really crazy stuff with, pre-snap motion, receivers coming into the backfield. You don't know who's getting the ball. And even their inside zone running scheme almost always has some element of a, cross formation blocker or an RPO. And to me, their run game is like, facing a lightweight boxer where you just don't know which direction they're going to come from, where they're going to hit you from, but they're going to hit you quick and fast. And like I said, this was ultimately a very effective run game last year, third in offensive rushing DVOA. But, oh, by the way, they were also second in passing DVOA. And their passing game, again, is entirely unique, looks unlike anything we see in the league right now. Teams will take a play here or a play there and try to run it inside their offense. And usually when they do, that works because these concepts are incredible, especially when you talk about that kind of cheat motion where they take Tyreek Hill, line him up real close to like the tackle, like sometimes he's just in a 2-point tight end stance. Use that motion to get him a free release, almost like it's the Canadian Football League where he gets just a free release out of a full sprint at the snap. It's just uncoverable. We've seen a lot of teams replicate that little cheat motion, but their passing game is heavily dependent on the RPO game, the read pass option game, where it's a run call that has a pass read element where Tua can look at the defense pre-snap and post-snap, and if he wants, he can get that ball out quick, put the ball in the hands of these incredible receivers that they have. But their RPO game is just different. A lot of RPOs in the league are slants, flats, bubble screens, quick outlets. The Dolphins, because of the speed of these receivers and how good Tua is in the RPO game, their RPOs are like speed digs and seam hitters and balls like up the sideline that lead to just explosive plays. So you have to defend the run and in many ways like vertical passes. It's wild what they're able to do through the RPO game. But you can't just run RPOs all the time. They have a very sound third down passing scheme as well. And it was just so cool what they did last year and how much they craft this around Tyreek Hill. I mean, they just put the fear of God in defenses that cheat motion, speed dig, that they felt like they were running that route like 4 times a week for the first 5 games of the season until anybody could figure out how to stop it. But they basically would just craft counters off of that specific route, whether it's scheming someone else open around Tyreek running that route because he knows how defenses are going to collapse that specific route, or having Tyreek fake like he's going to run that route and then run something else. And just the threat of Tyreek alone was in many ways able to design a deep drop back passing game for the Dolphins. It's not the only thing they did, but it was prominent for sure. So that's only scratching the surface of what Mike McDaniel is getting away with here in Miami. But I obviously have the utmost respect for him as a play designer and really as an overall coach. He has this unique personality, but it's completely worked. The locker room has bought in. I thoroughly enjoyed the Dolphins Hard Knocks, getting a look at just kind of his leadership style and truly like how goofy is this dude. He's still like in the meetings being a coach. Like he's not the way he is with the media 24/7. I mean, there's always a hint of that. But there are serious aspects of Mike McDaniel as well. And I think the players just absolutely adore him. I think for him, the only like last step for him is obviously like playoff success. But I think, he's shown us at this point that basically at the start of every season, he's going to come in with something new. And I think he can sustain that. We'll see, I guess. It's hard. I certainly couldn't do that. Just basically draw up something nobody's ever seen before every single year. That's hard as hell to do. But I think if that is the plan, whatever it might be, maybe don't unleash it on the league in the first 5 weeks of the season. Like maybe manage that a little bit more, like still run it, but hide it in there a little bit more. So it's not something that the entire league is labbing to figure out how to stop. And then, really, really unleash it week 17, week 18 into the playoffs. maybe something he's thinking about, because these teams have kind of slowly figured out what they're doing, and the Dolphins have slowed down in the second half of seasons, I think, really for that reason. So how he manages that and ensures that doesn't keep happening is going to be kind of the last leg, I think, for Mike McDaniel to be an elite head coach. He's, to me, a tier 2 great coach right now. That was a lot of time on McDaniel. I want to give Frank Smith his praise as well. I think he's a good coach. I think he's going to be a head coach probably next year. I was a little surprised he didn't get that offer this year. I don't know if he's not the best interviewer or he didn't want the job or what, but definitely doing a good job to help this offense work. He comes from much more of a pro spread, like a different coaching lineage, and I think is a very good voice for Mike McDaniel. But we got to talk about the defensive hire here as well. Anthony Weaver, I think it's a really exciting hire. And those that have followed this series know how this works. Like, new hires just aren't going to rank out that highly for me, especially guys that are, really getting the true defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator position for the first time, where it's their offense, they're calling plays, that type of stuff. Weaver has never done that, but he does have an extensive background of working with excellent coaches. Started with Rex Ryan and Mike Pettin, a very attacking, blitz-heavy system in his start of his career. Spent 5 years under Romeo Crennel, was eventually named defensive coordinator under Crennel as the interim head coach. So he has been a defensive coordinator for a little bit, but that was under Romeo Crennel's vision for the defense. And then he goes to Baltimore, spent a year under Wink Martindale, but most notably, of course, is Mike Macdonald. Coming from Baltimore the last 2 years, this is the defensive meta in the NFL that everybody wants a little bit of a piece of. Last year, it was really just Baltimore running this system. This year, it should be 5 teams, I believe. You've got Baltimore, Seattle, who hired Mike Macdonald, the Chargers with Jesse Minter coming from Michigan, the Titans, who hired Denard Wilson, and now Anthony Weaver for Miami. So we've talked about this system in this series, but I will hit on it again. The main thing that keeps getting brought up with why teams like this system is they've really revolutionized the terminology inside the locker room via the playbook to the players to just make things simpler, easier to understand, and allows not just them to play faster, but it allows them to stay very multiple within the defense without overloading the players. And instead of, you've got your nickel package and your 20 plays out of that, and you've got your dime package and your 30 plays out of that, and your base 3-4 and your base 4-3, and you've got a whole bunch of different words for all this stuff. They're teaching it now in through the lens of what gap you're playing in, and using the same terminology regardless of what formation you're in. And there's definitely more nuance to it than that, but we're still learning about this defense. I wasn't in Baltimore last year, so I can't perfectly communicate to you what it is, but I do believe that is the core of this, and it does make a lot of sense that would lead to what you're looking for there. Better understanding of the defense, allowing players to play fast, but also being able to stay multiple. You can come out in any front that you want and call whatever you want. So from the outside looking at it, it looks crazy, it looks complex, but from the inside, it's really not. It's very flexible, very liquid, and I think somewhat easy for the players to understand, at least. So they really will run any sort of front, whether it's 4-3, 2-4, 4-2, 5-1. They can do whatever they want in terms of the front. But you do see some pretty diabolical blitzes from Baltimore, because teams just can't really game plan for this. Again, because you're not calling necessarily a single play out of a single formation. You might have a blitz that worked the week before. You can call that same blitz in the snap of a finger out of whatever formation you're showing. So the team doesn't have the film on that blitz and has no idea it's coming. So you do see just some diabolical blitzing stuff. And then the coverage on the back end is multiple, as you would expect, but they do love that sort of quarters, almost Fangio-inspired approach, where it's a lot of too high pre-snap, rotating your safeties up and down, causing that confusion where you don't know if it's cover 6, cover 4, cover 3, even, cover 1 buzz where you've got a safety coming down to ball hawk. They run a lot of that stuff, but that's not all they lean on. They'll go man-to-man when it's right. They'll just come out and play cover 3 when they need to. Cover 2, they mix it all up. And you put that on top of everything we talked about with the front, and you can see why this defense is something teams are trying to replicate. So the scheme is exciting and theoretically will work. The question is Anthony Weaver the right teacher and coach to implement this system after just a couple years kind of putting it together with Mike Macdonald? No reason to believe he can't, right? He's coached every defense. I think he's ready for this opportunity. I want to say he was even listed as an assistant head coach in Baltimore. So this is not some young schmuck that just happened to work for Mike Macdonald. I think he was genuinely a part of this. So it's an exciting hire. And, in the first part of this video, I mentioned it's downgraded / to be determined. Vic Fangio is big shoes to fill, but do I believe Anthony Weaver can do a better coaching job with this system this year than Vic did in Miami last year? Absolutely. Hell, I might even bet on it. It's an exciting hire. And if this works, this is definitely the type of guy that's not going to be in Miami much longer. All it would take is someone willing to hire a defensive coach to be their head coach that wants to, continue to replicate this defensive meta. He might be the guy to do that. So, it's an extended breakdown of this coaching staff, but I think it's justified because the Dolphins ranking this high, especially in the offensive side of the ball, it is very centered around what they're doing schematically and kind of why this works. So I'm glad we have the opportunity to dive into it here. But that doesn't mean the roster doesn't matter. So let's transition and rank every position group here, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And we're going to start with Tua. It's time to talk about Tua. And we'll get to the contract and my sort of takes on it. But I do want to say with Tua, a lot of quarterbacks are accused of being system quarterbacks, and then the response to that is, okay, but that guy is the system, is the go-to response. I think Tua is the epitome of that and kind of takes that response to another level. His unique skill set and passing style is a non-negotiable reason for why this Dolphins offense works at an elite level. It doesn't just work, right? They were second in passing and third in rushing last year. But really what it boils down to is his ability to get the ball out as quick as he does. His 2.33 seconds to throw were by far the fastest in the league last year. But his ability to make quick decisions, read the defense pre and post snap, his feel for space and his quick release and his accuracy oftentimes on these throws is a unique skill set that you can't just go sign Derek Carr and get. You can't just go sign Jacoby Brissett and go get. And I'm guilty of saying they should do that. I am at the point where I am accepting it's not as simple as that for the Dolphins. They had a Teddy Bridgewater, and it was hideous trying to watch. If you're going to build this offense that is centered around RPOs and the quick-hitting passing game, you need a guy that trusts it, but can also mostly make the right decisions without putting the ball in harm's way. You are inevitably going to be wrong occasionally in a system like this, and you will get some really ugly moments from Tua because of the play style. And that is a small drawback, but I think the positives greatly outweigh the negatives in that specific regard. But it also provides a really unique asset for the Dolphins here in the sense that it allows them to basically ignore the offensive line as they have. The amount of times that a tackle or a guard are just getting dominated here, and you get a quick win from a pass rusher, but it doesn't matter because that ball is out. And in the case of Tua, he throws with such great anticipation. It's not just the RPO stuff. He'll put it out there like 2 seconds before Tyreek begins his break, or he'll launch these deep balls like 20 yards ahead of the guy, knowing that his receiver's going to get there. But to be able to like feel that space and know where the ball needs to go, it's a unique thing that he has, even if he doesn't have the strongest arm. And he sure as hell does not. But there just aren't a lot of quarterbacks that can throw the ball vertically in 2.2 seconds like Tua does. And that was a big thing with Tom Brady, right? He was elite at that. And again, it doesn't always work. You get some ugly throws where you see ugly misses where the receiver did not end up where Tua thought he would, or he throws it into a space and the defense reacts and they're able to get there. But again, I think the positives do outweigh the negatives in that regard with Tua. Even if, yes, there are going to be some ugly weeks. Tua has had some disgustingly bad games that you look at it and you're like, yeah, that just didn't work. And I think in the full picture, yes, that does hurt where Tua stands compared to other high-end, top 10 elite type of quarterbacks. But if you're able to pull back from that sort of discussion and look at Tua for what he is, which is the perfect quarterback for this offense, and maybe take that approach of like, okay, maybe we have to overpay Tua a little bit for what he is as a quarterback, but because of his play style, that 15 extra million that we have to give Tua, we don't have to give that to Robert Hunt because of his play style. It doesn't require to have a great offensive line. So if you kind of look at it from that perspective, you can totally understand why the Dolphins looked at this and said, look, if we don't want to be fired in 2 years and we want to keep running this offense the way we do, it has to be Tua. And if that means it's $55 million because his production has been absurd, so be it. And I was very critical of it when they signed him. I still don't love it, but having watched more film, kind of revisiting the Dolphins after months and months and months off of football, I get it. I do. And honestly, my main holdup really with the contract was and still is like the injury stuff. He was healthy last year for the first time in 5 years. That's my main holdup. It's like, don't you want to like franchise tag him and make sure it wasn't just a fluke that he was able to get through the whole season last year? Because he has been getting hurt every year going back to Alabama, and the poor guy is like a concussion away from God knows what. That was a major talking point on Tua last offseason. So that's like my main holdup is like, I don't know if his availability is going to be enough to justify $53 million a year with over half of that guaranteed. That to me is the riskiest part of this contract. But I'd be lying if I said there aren't like some frustrating deficiencies in his game as well. We talked about some of it, but like he has his play style. He can run this offense as good as anybody, but when a good defensive coordinator finds a way to disrupt some of these passes that in most weeks are wide open looks for Tua, not only do you get some ugly interceptions into those defensive looks and weeks where the offense stalls out against, really good teams, basically, because the good teams often are the teams with the good coaches and the good players on defense. But it's not just the ugly moments that you get in some of those games, but then it's the question of, okay, then what? Okay, you are the perfect engine for this machine, but what happens when that machine needs to change lanes? He's not the quarterback that can steer it in a different direction like basically all these top 10, top 12 quarterbacks in the league can do. And when they signed him to this contract, my take on the Twitter was like, I get it, but I just don't think the Dolphins are going to get a Super Bowl with Tua. They're going to have a lot of fun. They're going to have a lot of explosiveness. But I think what we've seen is, as the season goes on, teams get more film on what the Dolphins are doing. They get film on what other teams and other smart coordinators have done to take away the very unique offense that is here in Miami. And it's just that's putting a lot of pressure on Mike McDaniel to continue to come up with innovations as the season goes on. But when those system throws are taken away from Tua, not only does he still sometimes force those throws into ugly interceptions, but there's no pivot off of that. He's fine as a drop back passer. He's, if it's 3rd and 10 and I'm in a neutral situation in a vacuum, I'd say he's the 23rd, 24th best quarterback, just ripped out of this system, put him on the average offense, go throw for a first down on 3rd and 10. He's fine at it, but he certainly isn't great. I don't think his processing and decision-making in a normal drop-back environment is anything special. His arm clearly is bottom 5 in the league among starters. Every throw is not available to him. He could not throw in the cold weather in Kansas City. That was a very unique, rare situation that I think he's even getting a little too much hate for, but that is a thing. Like cold, bad weather games, he couldn't throw the ball more than 15 yards. And it's weird because he's generally very accurate. Like he throws these beautiful touch passes, like gets these guys right in stride. But even then, you do see a pretty high percentage of missed throws from Tua, and oftentimes they're just on an out route, throw to the flat. Like from a throw-to-throw accuracy point of view, I don't think he's remarkable. There certainly are times on film where he's throwing that deep out, 12 yards across the field, and it's just nowhere close to the receiver. And from a playmaking perspective, using his feet, sensing pressure, pocket management, that kind of stuff, again, he's okay at it. He can do some stuff out of structure. There are some nice moments. I think down in the red zone, that's where he's at his best, actually, is buying time with his feet and finding open throwing windows. They're all nice things he has, but none of it is special relative to the top quarterbacks in the league, right? The one special thing he has are those quick-hitting system throws that bring a unique asset to this football team, but the second those are taken away, he's not the guy. I think that is just putting a ton of pressure on Mike McDaniel to find a way that, when we get to late December and into the playoffs, we got to make sure this system is a well-oiled machine so that Tua can drive it. And that's not getting any easier, by the way, because Tyreek Hill is 30 years old and you're now paying Tua $53 million a year. So they have carved out a very narrow trajectory for how this can accomplish winning a Super Bowl. But ultimately, I just don't think it's as good of a path than just having the dynamic, do-it-all top 10 quarterback that is a little bit more multiple in the sense of what you can do offensively. But I do understand they kind of put themselves in a spot where this was what they had to do. So just rip the Band-Aid off and go get to work and prove that you can do it. Because we know this team can be amazing in the regular season. But where's that next step? Excited to see if they can do it. But let's move on. With that conversation, obviously the rest of this team is going to be very important. Mike White is their backup quarterback. I don't really have any notes on Mike White. He seems very much like an NPC backup, and if they have to go to him, I would imagine it'll be pretty ugly, as it has been really when anybody other than Tua has tried to run this system. But in terms of ranking Tua and this quarterback room, by the way, I do have them 15th in the league. And the final production from this room will almost certainly be much higher than that, but for all the reasons we described, that's where he settles in for me. We don't need to rehash it. I think we should move on to the weapons, which are tied for the best group in the league. An elite grade for me, ranking first to second, and that's kind of the other side of the Tua conversation that hasn't really been hammered home yet, is just how fucking insane Tyreek Hill is. He was voted the number one player in the NFL last year in the the NFL top 100 list, which is a joke of a list. But I think this is a case where, I actually agree. I think Tyreek Hill was the best player in the NFL last year. he is just an absolute headache to try and defend, especially within this system. It really is the perfect marriage between McDaniel's system, how he weaponizes Tyreek Hill pre-snap and through the scheme to get him consistent looks, with Tua, who trusts that system is going to be there and be there on time. And Tyreek Hill is the reason they're able to do a lot of this stuff. Those, quick inbreakers from an RPO, like the fact that they can throw a speed dig off of an RPO. Do you realize how freaking fast you have to be to do that? Or these quick hitting seam routes where he's 10 yards down the field, like by the time Tua gets the ball in his hands, it is just unparalleled. I mean, Jalen Waddle might be the second or third fastest receiver in the NFL, and he doesn't even really compare to what Tyreek Hill is able to do for this offense. It is like literally trying to defend a bolt of lightning every single snap. And as long as he is here and he's healthy, this Dolphins offense is going to be one of the best in the league. But what's crazy about Tyreek is it's not just that quick speed and the unique ways that they use him. And it's not just like, okay, you can line him up outside and no corner can run with him down the field. Like, the speed alone is insane, but he runs routes. He has a release package. He's strong. He's like 195 pounds at his size. Like, he's not like some of these tiny wide receivers that, yes, they're fast, but if you get your hands on him, you can completely derail him. He's got like contact balance through routes. You can't just use physicality to slow him down. It doesn't bother him. And he's got ball skills. Like, he does have occasional drops because he's moving so damn fast. Sometimes he takes his eye off the ball, but that's like the one knock on him. And even then, he's cleaned it up quite a lot from what it used to be in his first 4 or 5 years in Kansas City. But he also just like elevates and makes incredible catches and can like moss dudes because he can jump out of the gym. And I think this is kind of the final big take on Tyreek Hill. We'll see how much he can sustain this, but he's 30 years old. I don't think we're too far away from having like GOAT wide receiver conversations involving Tyreek Hill, putting him into that Randy Moss, Jerry Rice debate. Now, a lot of wide receivers that we've maybe entertained that idea have fallen off into their 30s. So being able to sustain that is going to be the difference maker here for Tyreek. But in terms of like just watching the film, is he one of the 3 to 5 best wide receivers you'll ever see? I think with the level of play he's been at the last couple of years, you could certainly consider that. So, dude's insane. He himself is in many ways the entire offense, and obviously, like, him alone basically is the reason that the Dolphins are like elite in terms of weaponry. And that's not to disrespect Jalen Waddle. He's very good in his own right. But I think if you put any other receiver here instead of Tyreek Hill, based on his skill set, this is not an elite group of weapons. It's not, first or second in the league. It's probably 5th or 6th. And that includes, even if this was like Justin Jefferson here, who I also give a 99 rating, I don't know if it's the same. It's just a different overall impact because of his style and his speed, and he just does something that maybe nobody ever in the NFL has ever been able to do. But, I don't mean that to disrespect Jalen Waddle either. I think it works both ways. If you replaced Waddle here with, an average number 2 wide receiver, this also doesn't rank out as high. I mean, he is one of the best number 2 wide receivers in the league. And the fact that they have 2 guys with this speed just opens up the playbook even more for Mike McDonald to just overwhelm you with these 2 guys. But I think you can see the difference between these 2 guys, because Waddle is more of that typical smaller speed wide receiver where, okay, great deep threat, impossible to run down after the catch, has some shiftiness as well. But he doesn't have the ball skills aspect and the play strength aspect of a Tyreek Hill, but you can still do a lot of the same stuff. And I don't even know if they've fully tapped into like if you're talking about Mike McDaniel, being able to sustain creative offense into January, I think balancing this a little bit more where you're doing some of the Tyreek Hill stuff with Jalen Waddle a little bit more, might be something that he can kind of get in the lab and find that to like truly unlock Jalen Waddle. And it's not that he, hasn't, done that yet, but I do think there's a little bit more to be tapped into here because he's just super talented, man. He's phenomenal. And I guess I don't have too much to add on him. Again, like one of the best number 2 wide receivers in the league, with a unique speed element here. But now I can safely say it is those two that give them this elite grade, because after that it's pretty mediocre. Honestly, the next piece you're excited about is probably Devon Achane, because pretty much everyone else is like strictly a role player. They really just want to funnel this offense through 2 wide receivers, and everyone else is just kind of there to block and catch underneath passes, be available to Tua when they need him. But as long as Hill and Waddle are healthy, everyone else is just kind of, I don't want to say an afterthought, but a small piece in the puzzle, if you will. But Achane is the guy that like can really hurt people here. And, listing him as a running back is what he is, but within the confines of this conversation, he's just explosive, run after catch weapon. They will like line him up out wide, throw him screens, give him jet sweeps. They'll put him in the backfield and motion him out. Like they'll just find ways to get the ball in his hands. And he's just, he's not the receiver that Hill and Waddle are in terms of route running and ball skills. But if Hill and Waddle are frustrating you down the field, Achane will also be frustrating teams underneath. And there is, of course, room for him to grow in terms of route running and establishing himself in terms of ball skills. He was definitely underutilized in that regard in college, so he does still have a lot to prove there. But I do list him as the kind of primary receiving back. It was, when these two guys were healthy, it was like 55-45 with Achane being out there over Mostert. I think we probably see that shift to like 60-40 with Achane in year 2 after what he showed last year. But I definitely think he's the next weapon that you need to talk about with this Dolphins team. And Mostert as well, it might even be the next guy after Achane you want to talk about, because they do still use him. He's a really good screen threat. He himself has speed and run after catch ability, but it is a little bit different with Achane because Achane just has different agility and change of direction, and overall elusiveness, whereas Mostert's more of like that speed train here. But those two guys do definitely play into the picture in this uniquely constructed offense. Then you got Odell. I just don't really expect much from Odell, man. I think they don't really expect that much from him. He's had like this weird injury. It's like undisclosed. Mike McDaniel said, we're just worried about having Odell at his best when we need him the most. It was like the quote. And that kind of makes sense. Like just kind of stash him as a secret weapon. And then, if you need another option in late December, in January, a guy that obviously has stepped up in the playoffs in big games, that can, be a number 3 wide receiver, be reliable, get open, run routes, help out your drop back pass game. I think he could play a factor down the stretch, but if you're talking fantasy football or any sort of season-long expectations for Odell, I would be surprised if he has like anything more than like 20 catches for like 300 yards and a couple touchdowns in the regular season. And even when he is full go, again, they just don't use 3 wide receivers as much as most teams. But then you bring in Jonnu Smith. He is fascinating. I think he's a nice addition here. McDaniel's been toying around with some of these types of guys, these big, fast, kind of quasi tight ends. They drafted Higgins out of Stanford in like the 6th round. They signed Chase Claypool. They've flirted with this, but have never really found the guy that can actually play tight end, and then be a weapon after that. I think Jonnu makes a ton of sense. He's had success in this role within these systems. He's not going to be their full-time tight end. They're still going to play Durham Smythe a lot because they want to just keep this guy in a block a lot, and that's not going to be Jonnu Smith. But he'll have some plays for Jonnu Smith where teams are just too worried about everybody else, and then Jonnu is still a really good run-after-catch threat with kind of that speed train running style. So he is another fun little piece here. Not going to have any semblance of consistency or anything like that, but just another guy for teams to be annoyed by. I like the addition. It's probably going to be more of an impactful football addition than it is any sort of great place for Jonnu to produce and be like this fantasy sleeper or anything like that. Then I guess Alec Ingold is the next guy you want to talk about. They do throw him the football. Had 15 catches, 120 yards last year. He's Pro Bowl fullback, man. We don't get to talk about a lot of those in this series. But seriously, that's kind of your pecking order there. And then you're getting into your backup wide receivers. River Craycraft, I think, continues to make this team, and they love his just reliability and soundness as a blocker and being in the right place at the right time. Nice player to have as a backup. Braxton Berrios, he's also a decent backup for guys like Hill and Waddle because he does have speed and acceleration, and at least in terms of can you ask him to do some of the stuff that Hill and Waddle do and it doesn't throw off the entire play? Yes, he's not as explosive, but he does provide some of that speed element. Eric Ezukanma, I think they are hoping he can be an elevated version of River Craycraft as that just possession, physical wide receiver, kind of in their own way. They're Jawan Jennings, different type of player, but they want that kind of hybrid wide receiver, if you will, in their own way. And then Malik Washington was just a nice draft pick because they do know that Tyreek Hill is getting older. Jalen Waddle has missed time throughout his years. Malik Washington's got juice, man. He doesn't quite have the 4.3 speed, but in terms of acceleration into his route, run after catch ability, was a nice pick, kind of in line with the type of playmaker that they're looking for here. Haven't heard too much from him in terms of climbing the depth chart because there's an opportunity for him to surpass guys like Berrios and Craycraft, but at this point in time, it doesn't seem the case. They also drafted Taj Washington. He's on IR right now. I frankly don't know what his injury is, if he's going to play at all this year. There wasn't really much of an opportunity for him anyway. But likewise, he's a shifty, finessey wide receiver, if you will. And then, of course, Anthony Schwartz is on this roster. Everybody's favorite Madden wide receiver. He's horrible. I don't think he makes the team. Did we forget anybody? Julian Hill plays a little tight end, fullback stuff for them. Jody Fortson is an athletic, developing tight end. If he makes the team, I would be interested to see what he could do in limited targets. The rest of the receiving backs, I just don't think we see too much of. So, yeah, I think we got it covered, man. This is a unique group. Probably the only setting in the league where just two guys really alone make this tied for the best group of weapons in the NFL. And this is obviously the biggest strength of this Dolphins team, and I would go a step further in saying really the reason why Tua is able to play at the level he has. But we do get to continue the conversation on these explosive playmakers as we talk about the running backs. And I just love this room, man. I've got the Dolphins ranked with a B+ grade, 6th to 12th for running back in the league. So basically top 10 at running back. And I don't think people realize how good Raheem Mostert is. He's going in, the 10th round of fantasy drafts right now? Is crazy. Especially with Achane going in, the 3rd. I get that Achane's exciting, but I don't think people realize how good Raheem Mostert was last year. Over 1,000 yards, 18 touchdowns, 4.8 yards per attempt. He was 6th in elusive rating per PFF. He was 7th in total missed tackles forced. Yards after contact, he was 6th. This is a top 6 to 7 running back in the NFL right now. And yes, he's old, but all he's done is get better with age. I think it's amazing that he has continued to build up his body to have more power in his running style, but that I think has helped his durability and just his completeness as a runner. So for me, I just explain to me the fantasy football gap here. It's not a disrespect to Devon Achane, but like Raheem Mostert is their starting running back, and that's not going to change this year unless his durability concerns from 3 years ago show back up. And I think people think maybe that he's just a speed threat at running back that's just only elevated by this offense, and they get excited because Achane's even faster. And it's like, no, that's just not true. Mostert has like impressive, dirty runs where he's breaking tackles, making good reads, doing stuff between the tackles that this team does still need somebody that can get physical and do that for them. And he's essentially the only one that can. So I love Raheem Mostert. And I think if you're not taking him in fantasy like 2 rounds before where he's going right now, I think you're making a big mistake. He's awesome. But yes, they do also have Devon Achane, who is one of the most exciting ascending running backs in the NFL. True lightning in a bottle type of back. I mean, we just haven't seen this type of speed at this position too often in the league. But we do occasionally get guys that are as fast as Achane, but he's got like some strength to his game. He can run through arm tackles, really good vision in space, and he's got really nice foot speed to work around you and force missed tackles too. So don't get me wrong, he's going to get used. This is probably going to be something like a 60-40 split. And I think it's, in general, they will both get used on all 3 downs, but it'll probably be, if it's first and second down, Mostert will be out there about 60% of the time. Achane, of course, about 40% of the time. And if it's third down, I think that flips. And we see Achane out there a little bit more for receiving stuff, and Mostert taking a back seat a little bit more in those roles. But obviously a sensational duo that could even be, we've got him 6th to 12th right now. If Mostert stays healthy and Achane continues to, if he has half the efficiency as he had last year, that'll do, because his yards per carry was like absurd, 7.5. Even if he's at 5.5, that'll be plenty for this group to basically ascend to be in one of the 2 or 3 best running back rooms in the league. It's a huge asset for this team. They did draft Jalen Wright. I think he's long-term, like the long-term Raheem Mostert replacement. I know he's gotten a lot of buzz. Everyone says he looks great. I fully anticipate that he will be good within this system whenever that opportunity comes. But I don't see them rushing to the table to get Mostert and Achane off the field for Jalen Wright. So, I think Mostert got a 2-year extension this offseason. I could see 2 years of Mostert, and then in 3 years, Jalen Wright steps in and maybe has a breakout season at that point. But and maybe injuries happen and that opportunity comes sooner than you're planning for. But, a nice pick, but kind of future planning, in my opinion. He brings a very similar speed train type of running style that Mostert does. They also have Jeff Wilson. They might go to Jeff Wilson over Jalen Wright. They like Jeff Wilson. He's been in this system for a long time. He's a nice player. And then they also have Chris Brooks, was really efficient on his touches last year. He's more of the hammer, 6'1", 220 pounds. Maybe could step up as like a touchdown vulture if he makes the team. I don't know. But that's your running back room. It's phenomenal. Tua does get a little boost for the run multiplier. And this is, I actually didn't originally have this, but having watched the Dolphins, I did feel like they get a numbers advantage from Tua, which is in the run game, which is really what this is about. It's not like most teams where it's from read options. It's more just because he's so good at RPOs, and a lot of them are on like he's pulling it and booting out and frustrating teams that way with some of his mobility. It does help the run game, and I do think that should be reflected, especially here. Like everybody runs RPOs, but it's turned up a little bit more with Miami, and because he's so good in the RPO game, I wanted to give them a little bit of a multiplier in the run game because of it, because I do think it's reflected in their production. But obviously, you are not giving him design carries because you want to minimize, especially now that you're paying him, you want to minimize the amount of times he gets hit, given his durability. And I guess that's a transition to the offensive line, because I don't think this offensive line is going to do a great job minimizing how much Tua gets hit. We mentioned the losses on the O-line, and they really, for the most part, ignored the O-line this offseason. I have them ranked 31st in pass blocking, a little bit better, though, 21st in run blocking, where they do, by the way, get a decent boost from having Alec Ingold, who is a very good blocking fullback. The way that they kind of weaponize him in the run game is a legitimate guy worth mentioning here before we get started. But 29th overall for offensive line. And all of that comes with some of that sort of medical red flag question mark type of stuff with this offensive line. If you could guarantee me that Teron Armstead and Isaiah Wynn are healthy and play the majority of the season, this would rank out much better, probably 10 spots higher. But this is a combo on the left side of their offensive line that you can say probably with a bullet that you are, if there's 34 games available between the two of these guys, I think you would expect about 15 games, 20 at best. And with Armstead, that's baked into how much they're paying him, basically. He is paid much less than his actual on the field play would justify or indicate. He's a top 10 left tackle when he plays, but he only gets it's a weird contract, but 13 to 15 million a year. That's what Austin Jackson gets, right? So everybody knows this dude he's 33 years old. He's already been getting banged up. The last 2 years, he's played 10 games and then 13 and a half games, including a playoff game, and 8 games, including a playoff game. That's almost exactly 50% of the available snaps for Teron Armstead have been played. And he's unique because they're not it's not like he's had one big injury that takes him out for the rest of the year. That would be one thing, but he just has these little dings and knocks that take him out for a week or two, or he has to leave in the second quarter. His availability is just all over the map. He's like a 44 injury rating in Madden, if you will. But again, when he plays, he is a rock. He is a complete asset, franchise left tackle type of play. He's essentially locked down in pass protection, and he's really good as a run blocker too. At his age, 33 years old, he's still a really good athlete. They love to get him on the move for all these tosses and outside runs that they go with. Not a bad word to say about him when he's playing. But then at left guard, Isaiah Wynn, he's already on the pup. He went down for the year last year, and his availability for the Dolphins in the first place was very durability related. New England was kind of done with him because he just couldn't get through a season healthy. So he's got to come off the pup and get out there. They assume he will be the starting left guard when he does, but how long does he stay on the field? We just genuinely have no idea. If they're lucky, he'll recover well, and maybe he's just been bad injury luck, but they just, these two guys were available because of durability concerns, and they have had to deal with that. And in the case of Isaiah Wynn, it's not like Teron Armstead where when he plays, he's sensational. Wynn's been just okay. Honestly, his best tape in the NFL has been at tackle when he was healthy and young on the Patriots. As a guard, he's been fine, workable. They'll definitely take him when they can have him. Then the Aaron Brewer signing is fun. They love, like I said, to get these guys pulling out on the move, go find a linebacker, in Aaron Brewer's case, a safety, pave the way for these fast players and explosive plays. Aaron Brewer is about as good of a find as they could have had for that, but he's 285 pounds. He cannot hang one-on-one in pass protection. You have to keep a double team in there for him. And even moving guys in between the trenches, you're just not going to get a lot of push. So when you talk about this team not necessarily improving the strength and physicality aspect and leaning into the finesse phase of their team, Aaron Brewer is a part of that, right? So he'll have some really fun games, some exciting blocks, but he's going to have his negatives as well. He was available for a reason. Robert Jones is now going to step up at right guard. He is a very similar skill set in terms of strengths and weaknesses to Robert Hunt. Big, mauler, but just not as consistent as Robert Hunt. He's been okay when he's played. He's still pretty unproven, but I think he'll actually probably be okay. But from a pass protection standpoint, he'll get his feet crossed up. He'll get over his skis. And until proven otherwise, he's just not someone you can depend on in pass protection. And then Austin Jackson at right tackle, he's okay. He's developed into a decent right tackle. They gave him a lot of money. I don't know if it was necessarily worth it, but he has been a good run blocker for this system. I will give him that. He's a big reason why their run blocking is so much better than their pass blocking. He's an athlete. Again, they'll get him on the move. He can do some stuff there. He can actually reach a defensive end and seal him off for wide zone. I don't have any complaints for him in that phase. But yeah, as a pass protector, he has gotten better, but he's gotten better from like rock bottom. He still loses to power. He still is a work in progress in terms of technique. Theoretically, could still be getting better, but he's kind of past the stage in his career where you're expecting him to continue to get better. So again, when healthy, this is a solid offensive line with some weak spots. But as we know, you're going to have, a third of the year, you're going to your backup tackle most likely. So that's Kendall Lamb, who's a decent swing tackle. They bring him back. He's a swing tackle for a reason, right? Like he will take his losses, but he is here for that specific role. Just don't be a complete liability when Armstead's not available, and we'll find a way to work around it. From a pass protection standpoint, he's honestly probably about as good as Austin Jackson, but the run blocking, he just doesn't have play strength. He's not a run blocker at all. And then they do bring in Patrick Paul in the draft. Freaky, like lengthy, athletic, developmental type of prospect. His pass protection was like okay at Houston, but it was at Houston. I think there's definite room for improvement in terms of all-around technique, but I kind of like him as a pass blocking prospect. Where I was underwhelmed by Patrick Paul was his run blocking was just abysmal, man. Like he did not fire off the ball, could not drive guys north and south, and honestly, he played kind of passive. He didn't look like a guy that enjoyed flying off the ball and hitting dudes. Now, when they would like get him on the move and he got to have fun and like go nail a linebacker, you see the nastiness. So if they can unlock like the down-to-down tenacity, you might have something here. And I love getting Teron Armstead as a mentor. Brett Coleman shared a clip of Teron Armstead talking at the O-Line Masterminds camp. I mean, you can see why Teron Armstead has had such a good career, because he knows his shit. And to have that guy in Patrick Paul's ear is a huge luxury. So I like the landing spot. I like his future projection, but I'd still probably put Kendall Lamb in first until you can trust Patrick Paul. And then it falls off after that. Interior depth as well is going to be important because Isaiah Wynn's availability is a huge concern, and you don't know if Robert Jones is, he could be a potential problem for you. So you have Liam Eichenberg, who's been a second-round bust for this team. He just has never been able to add the play strength. He's always had the athleticism and the technique, but he just, his hands accomplish nothing. He loses to power. He unfortunately he's been filled out. I mean, he's a reason I'm worried about Roger Rosengarten, honestly, because he was like the same prospect and just hasn't worked out. You got Lester Cotton, who's very much in this mold that they've had success with. He's that big smasher, behind Robert Jones, makes sense. And then Jack Driscoll is someone I kind of like. I think he might be their best option. We'll see who they think their best option is. If and when Isaiah Wynn's not available, but he's started some games at guard for the Eagles. Obviously had a lot of help around him, but I liked him as a prospect. He's just got really good technique and, kind of similar to Liam Eichenberg coming out in a lot of ways, lacked that play strength element, but he has actually had some better success at guard than someone like Eichenberg. So I would say their tackle depth is like pretty solid and their guard depth is below average, giving them kind of overall kind of average offensive line depth. But obviously, it's a concern, man. They do play around it, right? We talked about that with Tua. He gets the ball out quick. They run the ball to the perimeter so that they don't have to lean on, guys like Brewer driving a nose tackle backwards. They work around this group, but it only makes them more one-dimensional in the sense of like they have to stick to their scheme, their script. But between Tua and this offensive line, if you take away the scheme stuff and they just got to go to a drop-back passing game, they can end up in a pretty bad spot. But let's wrap up the offense as a whole. They come out as my 7th ranked overall offense, 10th in run game, 7th in passing game. A very unique operation here, but obviously I'm expecting them to still be one of the better offenses in the league. Maybe a slight step down from being second last year offensively. They could repeat it. They definitely could. But I think part of that is I think you do have to account for are they the second best offense in the NFL when they go against good defenses that force them off script? No. But when they go against bad defenses that can't hang with this system, they are by far the best offense in the league. So I don't think, DVOA is the entire picture for who the Dolphins offense was last year either. So I think 7th is a pretty good meeting of the middle there for sure. But let's now switch over to the defensive side of the ball. A lot of question marks here. We already talked about the changing defensive coordinator, but this defensive line, God, it's hard to even analyze, man, because I just don't know what the hell we're going to get from this group. But let's work our way through it. They come out pretty close to the bottom in the league. They are 27th to 28th for overall D-line, 24th to 30th for pass rush, and 24th to 28th for D-line run defense, and just C grades across the board. But the ranking is almost irrelevant for this group because it could just go in any direction. This could be the worst D-line this year, and this could be a top 12 D-line this year, depending on how the health goes. So really tough to break down. Now, I will say I actually bumped them up after hearing some pretty good news about Jalen Phillips out there. He's out there practicing, and they say he looks great. I mean, that's awesome. This was such a devastating injury for a guy that was basically forced to retire in college for, completely unrelated to any sort of lower body injury. It was like a neck and back deal. But he comes out of retirement, becomes a first-round pick, and really was on a trajectory towards being an elite pass rusher, or at least a true number one, game-wrecking edge. Maybe something like a Josh Allen, Rashawn Gary type trajectory. And then the Achilles tear comes at the worst possible time. So it's just how much does that set him back? When healthy, this dude has the complete package: speed, power, finesse, defends the run. I'm a big fan of Jalen Phillips. And it sounds like they're going to get something from him. So I had the Dolphins basically tied for last. And then when I heard that he's looking pretty good, that was enough to bump them up a little bit. Now, it's just preseason. It's just camp. He's going against not the best tackles. I don't know if that's against Teron Armstead or Austin Jackson that he looks good, or Paul, or who he's going against that he looks good, So it's hard to say, but I am happy to get some good reports on him, and hopefully he can continue his trajectory. And if he does, again, that's big news for the Dolphins. Then you got Bradley Chubb. I'm much more concerned about him. He's still on the PUP list. He went down week 17, so just for a normal ACL injury, that's already pushing up against the start of the regular season. And this is his second ACL to that knee. I believe it is the same knee, and that's just brutal timing and just news for Bradley Chubb. But they had just traded for him, just paid him, and he was just starting to look like he was worth what they gave up to get him, a first-round pick and a huge contract. He was balling out last year. He was having his best year, was really impressing me on tape. I've always viewed him as a true number 2 type of player. I think that's where his production has been. But last year, he was rushing a low-end 1, high-end 2 type of guy. Really just looking explosive, winning with a lot of finesse. I was really impressed by him. And then the ACL injury happens. So it's damn, how much is that going to set him back? What type of explosiveness does he have? And I hate to bring it up, but can he stay healthy after it? He just has, his body has just taken a beating since he got to the NFL. So just impossible to know how much Bradley Chubb you're getting and what Bradley Chubb you're getting. And I think the Dolphins know that because they spent a first-round pick on Chop Robinson. And, at least for Chop, he's going to be available for this team, but I have no confidence that he is going to be a great pass rusher out the gate. He's just so raw. I did feel like they took him on like the very high end of where I would have started thinking about Chop Robinson. He gives me a lot of Vic Beasley vibes, and that's just kind of what I saw. Like, I love the speed. I love the bend. His first step is ridiculous. He brings a trait that, you just don't find every year in the draft. But, we've seen teams go for that trait in guys like Vic Beasley. I think Bruce Irvin is an example of that. Maybe a little bit of like Leonard Floyd, a little bit. It's just more often than not, I think it has been more fun in theory than it has led to an actual like high-end player on the field. I think for Chop, he's got to learn how to get to, use the threat of that speed to get into a speed to power bull rush much more consistently. I think it's in there. That would be the most likely path for him to being a good player, is just have speed and have power. That can make you a good number 2 alone. But he doesn't really have pass rush moves. He just was winning off of the one thing that he had at Penn State, and that was running around the tackle, where college tackles just couldn't keep up with him. And the other reason I wasn't a huge fan of him is you can't really play him on early downs. He plays light. He is undersized, but he plays even lighter than he's listed. And expecting anything from him in terms of run defense is just not true to what he did on tape. Like, if he gives you that, that's great. That's a huge, pleasant surprise, but certainly not what Chubb and Phillips give you in terms of like real 3-down play at the position. I know that was an overly negative outlook on Chop Robinson. It's just, he was a very boomer bust prospect, and they picked him very high. So expectations for him have been escalated. And I don't know. I think his most likely outcome is like a chess piece type of, speed rusher that is someone that you can weaponize in certain blitz and stunts to just kind of tap into that one trait that he has. But I just did not see a complete player there. We'll see. I would love to be wrong. And if I'm wrong, it's great news for the Dolphins, obviously. And I just want to reiterate, like, I don't think he's going to be useless. I think that speed and bend does heat up the quarterback and gets you thinking, like, this guy is always going to be on my ass. He's going to have pressures. He's going to have sacks. But we're now talking about him living up to being a top 20 pick and being like a complete, starting edge player. And I just need to see it. In terms of edge depth, they have Emmanuel Ogbah, who's a big body. At this point in his career, he's an adequate rotational piece. Mo Camara is a fun 5th-round pick. He's very polished. He's got bend around the corner. He's got good play strength. Many shades of Shaq Barrett. And it was fun that Shaq Barrett was here for a little bit before he retired, because same school, pro comp was the same. Not saying that changes his trajectory too much, but going to have to do it without the mentorship of his pro comp and predecessor, if you will. But, for a 5th-round pick, he's got as good of a chance as any of them. But he was a 5th-round pick, so we'll see. Quentin Bell, I did see some hype on him. We'll see. He's out of what, like Prairie Valley or something? I don't even know the school that he came out of, but he had a crazy workout. And he's bounced around. But, hey, if something's clicked for him at 27 years old or whatever, would love to see it. Cameron Good has played a little bit early down stuff for them, but he's on the pup right now. Needless to say, like, you want Phillips and Chubb out there. We'll see what you get from Chop Robinson in his rookie year, but it's just like, if those guys aren't there, or if they're hugely diminished versions of themselves, you are talking about potentially one of the worst edge groups in the league. But then you slide inside, and it's a tough conversation, because I think if you look at kind of how I have graded Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell, you would say, well, shouldn't the D-line run defense grade and maybe even the pass rush grade be a little bit higher, but specifically with the run defense grade? And it's like, yeah, yes and no, because I like both these guys when they're deployed as a 3-tech, a 4-eye. They're both undersized, but they both have like crazy effort, good feet, good run defenders in one gap. But they don't have a Christian Wilkins replacement here. I mean, and that's a lot to ask, but they didn't even go get like a true defensive tackle. They went and got Calais Campbell, who at 37 years old had a great year last year, kicking back outside of the edge for Atlanta. And in Baltimore, where Anthony Weaver had Calais Campbell, by the way, he did play interior defensive line, but almost exclusively as like a 3-tech, a 4-eye, and a 5-tech for like base 3-4. So this becomes a very complicated conversation because he actually played very well and didn't really show signs of regressing at 37 years old. He's now 38. That's not really my concern on Calais Campbell, but I do put the down arrow on him because they're going to be, I think, asking him to do something that he really hasn't done before, and that's be like a true defensive tackle, at least a lot of the time, because they're going to have to. And he's 6'8", he's 300 pounds, and he's always been at his best when he gets to play as a 5-tech more on the edge. But in terms of like assigning a grade to him, it's tough. Like, he was one of the best run defending edge players in the league last year, and he's been like pretty good at it when he's been asked to do it from more of a, inside shade of the tackle position. But they're going to have a hard time keeping him there when their only nose tackle on this roster is Benito Jones, who's basically been nothing other than an athletic big body in his time in the league, and to expect too much from him is going to be tough. So, yeah, we'll see what we get from Calais Campbell. I'm not saying it was a bad signing. It's just this is kind of a square peg, round hole situation with this signing with the rest of these pieces. And to spend some more time on Zach Sealer, like he's a really nice player, but again, he plays about 295 pounds. And if you go back to what we said about him last year, actually, I pointed out that now that they're getting, away from the Belichick system where he got to play a lot of that hybrid end type of stuff where he's just splitting gaps. He goes to a Fangio defense, had to, play more true defensive tackle. Sure enough, his run defense grade plummets. And of course, PFF run defense grades aren't perfect, but you could feel it. Like he's not someone that's really gonna like hold his own against the run. He's more of a guy that's good at getting off blocks, being a playmaker. But if you block down on him or you double team, he's going backwards. And I think that's going to be the case with Calais Campbell because he's 6'8", and he's 300 pounds. Like it's not that hard to get under his pads and drive him back as a center or a guard. So these guys are good at getting off blocks, and when they're put in a very specific role, they're awesome run defenders. But who the hell else are they going to ask to really play true defensive tackle here if not these two guys? I know they'll ask Benito Jones to do some of it. I don't love that. Deshaun Hand is the same problem. He's a hybrid end. Jonathan Harris, same problem, hybrid end. And Neville Gallimore got ran out of Dallas because he couldn't defend the run. So again, it's a tough conversation. You look at a good run defense grade on Sealer and a stud run defense grade on Calais Campbell. I want to acknowledge that they're good in a certain spot, but the team run defense grade and overall just how they'll defend the run this year, it's a worry. And you've already gotten lighter on the offensive line. You're now taking an edge player, putting him inside, even if he's the hybrid edge of all time in Calais Campbell. And you're just getting squishier in the trenches. You just are. Now, I do want to at least talk about these guys as pass rushers. I do like Campbell and Sealer as an interior duo. I think that's more than good enough. Campbell can still win with some power, win with some swim moves as a 3-tech. He still did that in Atlanta at times. And Sealer as well has a really nice pass rushing skill set. Neither of these guys are hyper efficient, but they're a nice interior duo for third downs. It's much more about, okay, neither of those guys are number one guys, and the edge room is just, we have no idea what you're going to get. So, obviously just the wild card of wild cards for this team. This, like I said, could be a top 12 defensive line this year. It could be the worst. There's only one way to find out, and that starts in 2 weeks. Now, as we switch to the linebackers, they should be able to compensate at least a little bit for being a little bit lighter up front with these linebackers. They rank very well for linebacker run defense in that big cluster of kind of indistinguishable but very good groups of run defending linebackers, 3rd to 11th. Much worse in coverage, though, 21st to 26th. And that is good for a top half group of linebackers for me. They come in 12th to 15th for overall linebacking for the Dolphins. And I do love this combination of players. You have David Long Jr., who I would say the best analysis on him is he plays linebacker like we all do in Madden, where he's just gonna fly to the ball with reckless abandon for what his gap was. Pursuit angles can be horrible at times. In coverage, he's going to roam around like a headless chicken, run after the first thing he sees. Sometimes he'll make a play off of it. 4 other times, he just vacated his space entirely. And he does that while being a little undersized, not the best athlete in the world, and you get a lot of missed tackles from him. But he did end up number 1 in PFF run defense grade last year because the amount of positively graded plays that he gets are just off the charts. Like, he just has so many explosive, disruptive plays in the backfield, and he has really nice instincts to make that stuff happen. So he's aggressive as all hell. I do think it hurts his overall consistency and potentially makes him a little overrated at times. But not all the time. He's a really fun player, and I love getting Jordan Brooks next to him. Jordan Brooks came up as, mentored by Bobby Wagner, a much smarter player. He's still aggressive, but much smarter in terms of gap discipline. I think the perfect way to frame this is David Long's average depth of tackle was 2.2 yards, which is very, very shallow for a linebacker. Like, if he's making a play, it's at the line of scrimmage for the most part. Jordan Brooks was about 4. Which is still pretty good, but goes to show you, like, he's much more like, stopping you at the 4-yard mark as opposed to right at the line of scrimmage. Much better at actually engaging, holding his gap, deconstructing at the point of attack, defending the run in the way that you would normally ask a linebacker to do it. And to pair that with David Long, who's just going to be blowing shit up all the time, it's a pretty fun duo, and overall, that could actually be a really nice approach from the second level of the defense. Have one guy muddying things up and another guy cleaning up a little bit more. The thing with Jordan Brooks is a little bit of its durability, but also my man missed 16.5% of his tackles. That's like bad for a safety, let alone a run defense forward middle linebacker. That was 80th out of 89 eligible linebackers in missed tackle percentage. You are not going to be a great run defender when you're missing that many tackles. So, got to clean that up. He's more than capable of it, but that's really the main difference. And David Long misses tackles too, but it wasn't quite that bad. But also, like I said, Long is the aggressive guy. You can understand why he's missing tackles, whereas Brooks, and I'm not saying Brooks is never aggressive and he never shoots a gap, but if that's going to be your philosophy, you want Brooks to be much more consistent in that regard. So we'll see if he can improve that. If he does, I do think Brooks can continue to get better and ultimately be the better linebacker between the two of these guys, especially because neither of these guys wow me in coverage. Brooks is the better athlete, but David Long at least makes some plays. I just don't know that Brooks has like great coverage feel. He never really has. Outside of his game, I just don't know if he's got the instincts for it. So like I said, they do rank much worse for coverage than they do for run defense. But I do think these two guys together should be able to kind of compensate for the lack of physicality up front. And then I do like Anthony Walker as a backup a lot. He's a really balanced overall player. He's a better coverage player than a run defender. But as a backup linebacker, I can work with Anthony Walker. And both David Long and Jordan Brooks have missed a decent amount of time over the last couple of years. David Long especially just has like soft tissue issues. So putting Anthony Walker in off the bench, A-okay with me. And he's actually probably their best coverage linebacker. Certainly not what the other two guys are in terms of physicality and run defense, though. You do have Duke Riley, who's gradually settled in as a decent enough backup. And then the very fascinating Channing Tindall was a, underwear Olympics god, but was the LB3 at Georgia, just didn't play a lot. Just very much someone that's an athlete trying to learn the position, and we'll see if he ever amounts to anything as a former third-round pick. But yeah, it's a good linebacker room, though more run defense forward than coverage forward after losing Jerome Baker. But as we look at the secondary, I think you can understand why they wanted more of a run defense-oriented group of linebackers, because this group is sensational on the back end. I have the Dolphins ranked second for DB coverage, one of the most underrated units in the entire league, frankly. And I think this defense could do some really special stuff that even if the pass rush is towards the bottom of the league, where we're kind of ranking them right now, I still think this secondary with Anthony Weaver in this system could still be enough to make this a pretty good defense. So you have Jalen Ramsey is your alpha corner, and I've kind of for the first time have lowered my opinion on Jalen Ramsey at least a little bit. And in a weird way, he's kind of my biggest question mark for this secondary, not in the sense of I think he'll be great. I think he is a number one corner and still an awesome player, right? But he's a question mark in the sense of just how good is he going to be? I think over the last 2 years, he certainly has not been the top 5 Hall of Fame level corner that he was for the first 6-7 years of his career, right? And last year, 2 out of his first 3 games back were elite corner performances. He had 3 picks in 2 games against New England and Las Vegas, and it was oh God, look out! Jalen Ramsey's gonna be transformative for this defense. And then after the first few weeks back, he was actually just kind of mediocre. Not a lot of playmaking on the back end. Gave up some big plays, and to be fair, teams still just generally stay away from Jalen Ramsey, right? But when they did go at him, they did have some success. And that was somewhat similar in 2022 as well, where you started to see him giving up more big plays than you typically saw from Jalen Ramsey. So he is 30 years old, and it's been a couple years since we saw elite Jalen Ramsey. I still like the film. I still think he moves really well. We know he's super smart. And this is just a weird position where you will just get some random high volatility stuff. So it's hard to say if correlation versus causation, you know what I'm saying? He could just be going through a rough stretch in his career right now. He could bounce back and be, Sauce is on a different planet right now, but he could be in that elite tier of corners this season. I don't really see a ton of physical decline in Jalen Ramsey. It's just been his production has declined. And that's where the kind of yellow arrow comes in on Jalen Ramsey. I still have him graded out as a top 5 corner or so, but could I see him being more of the 15th best corner here at 15 years old? More of an 84 overall player as opposed to the 91 that I'm putting him at? I could see that. But again, I could also see him just settling back in form and a really nice defensive fit here and having another monster season. I'm not done with Jalen Ramsey, but I do see the signs of regression as well. So he's kind of the polarizing player here, if you will, even if the floor is still extremely high, as a legit number 1 corner. But I love the Kendall Fuller signing. I think it's one of the most underrated moves of the offseason. They sneak him in on a 2-year, $15 million contract. They put a bunch of void years on it. He's only a $2.5 million cap hit this year. And I think he might be one of the best number 2 corners in the league. I always pushed back on him being this great number 1 corner in Washington, because there were times for example, he's always been the Madden ratings come out and he's always been a 90 overall. I'm all right, that's a little crazy for Kendall Fuller, but man, he is the definition of reliability as a number 2 corner in what should be a pretty zone-heavy defense here. He's one of the highest IQ corners. He does a lot of the off coverage at a really high level, fluid hips, reads the quarterback's eyes. So you can play him as an off corner, but he doesn't always give up the underneath stuff. He can actually come down and make plays without giving up big plays as well. He's going to be a great fit here. Love this signing. And then you have Kader Coho, who's like this young, ascending stud slot corner. He's still, I think, putting things together in terms of coverage consistency. He just takes his losses. He just does, but he makes a lot of plays and has a lot of good coverage reps as well. He looks plenty athletic enough for me for a guy that came into the league, undrafted, 7th round pick. I think it was undrafted. But that's not super uncommon for slot corners to make it undrafted. And then from a run defense perspective, like that's where he gets you excited. He makes these really high instinct plays, these physical plays. It's just the tackling consistency for him that knocks his run defense down for me. Missed 17% of his tackles last year. So it's like, even if you're making these great high instinct plays, it can be all for naught if you can't finish. So you want to see, I mean, that's like the biggest thing I want to see from him is if he can cut that down 7%, I mean, that's gonna lead to a huge uptick in like high impact plays from him. So I like him. It's just there's still some stuff to clean up, but I think he's probably gonna play at about a top 10 slot cornerback level for them, which is really nice when you've got such a set outside duo there. And then you also have Cam Smith, just kind of here developing, athletic 2nd round pick. I do like Cam Smith. I always push back on like the 1st round hype on him, but I still had him as like my 47th player or something in that draft class. It's about when they took him. Playmaking zone corner. I think it's going to be a fun system for him. I think it's a good opportunity for him to learn from 2 of the smartest freaking corners in the league, Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller. So maybe more of a 2025 type of potential breakout player, but nice depth to have. If a guy goes down, you'd be curious to see how he plays. And then you have Nick Needham. He's played a lot for this team, still sticking around. He's slow as shit, but smart, as consistent as he can be for as slow as he is. And then they also signed Ciaran Neal. He's interesting in the sense that this is that Ravens defense coming over. Ciaran Neal has always been that kind of like slot corner, dime safety hybrid type. I don't know if he's going to get on the field, but theoretically he could be in some packages something like a Kyle Hamilton in terms of role usage. It's something to keep an eye on, I guess. Also, just the most elite cornerback 7 name competition of all time. Ethan Bonner versus Storm Duck. Let's go. Put them both on the team. I don't care. That's all name team type of stuff right there. But as far as the safeties go, I mean, Javon Holland's a top 5 safety in the league. He can do it all. He's got great range. You can put him down in the box. He's not the biggest guy, but he can take on blocks and be a run defender down there. A great blitzer. I mean, what's not to say about Javon Holland, man? He's got to stay upright. He missed some time last year, but you put that player on the back end of one of the best cornerback trios in the league. Yeah, you can start to see why this is my 2nd ranked secondary in the league. And then Jordan Poyer, I mean, look, he's slowing down. His film tells you that. His production tells you that. There's no doubt. Buffalo was ready to move on from him, but he's still a good coverage player. Super smart. This is a defense that's going to run a lot of that pattern matching stuff on the back end. That's like all they ran in Buffalo. So he's going to be like an extension of the coaching staff, even if the scheme is, the coaching tree is different. He's his 1st year on the team. He's going to be a great guy in terms of making sure the communication is up to snuff. The pass-offs are working. He has still adequate speed and range, and he's still an adequate run defender. It's just a nice signing. I like him more than what they had from like Brandon Jones and even Elliott still to this point. And, he's getting older, slowing down. You don't know how much regression he's going to face, but I still think he's going to be a pretty nice piece for them this year. And then you also have Marcus May, fun signing as a backup. He's been injured to all hell, and when he's played, he's been super inconsistent, but why not? And then Elijah Campbell's stuck around on this team. They drafted Patrick McMorris. I didn't get to him, so I don't know too much about him, to be honest. Mark Perry, I did watch at TCU. Didn't love him. Yeah, I mean, you could do better in terms of safety depth, and I do wish they had someone kind of developing here because it's a good environment for a young corner. Maybe that's Patrick McMorris, but I guess I'd be a little surprised there. We'll see. But let's wrap up this defense. Like I said, they aren't great up front, but that secondary is awesome. And if the coaching is good here, this could still be a pretty solid defense. I have them ranked 18th, and that's kind of at their floor before Weaver proves what he can do as a coach. And that's also factoring in like pretty much I don't want to say it's a worst case scenario for the pass rush, but putting the pass rush and the D-line run defense in the bottom third of the league, I think that's, close to their floor there. But there's a best case scenario where Phillips and Chubb get back healthy, and maybe Chop Robinson is better than I'm projecting. I mean, this could be a top 10 defense to complement one of the better offenses in the league. So it's a polarizing group, but there is hope here, and I'm excited to see what this looks like, especially with the coverage and the coaching and how that kind of comes together. More often than not, I'm a pass rush first kind of guy. But there are situations like, I think of like, what was it, like the 2016, 2017 Patriots, where they didn't have much of a pass rush, but they had great coaching, obviously, and a great secondary, and they were still one of the best defenses in the league. I mean, that's kind of this team's model, other than the edge rushers just getting healthy and them just having a lot of talent. But let's talk some special teams here. They do come out pretty low for my special teams rankings, but even there's some hope. What I do is I take the last 2 years for the kicker grades, because kickers are all over the place and they fluctuate year to year. But Jason Sanders did have a breakout season last year and was absolute money for this team. So they were top 10 in kicker grade last year, but the year before that, not so much. So they come out 18th for kicker grade over the last 2 years. But if you want to be optimistic and say they get the same Jason Sanders as they did last year, at least their kicker situation's in a really good spot. Now, they did definitely get penalized by both PFF and DVOA for their overall just like kick coverage. The total team special teams grades were not good for them, so they clearly have a lot to clean up. I don't think you're panicking about this special teams, but they did come out 26th for me for special teams. But let's do a little recap here. Again, my 8th overall team, they come out 7th for offense, 18th for defense, 26th for special teams, but plenty of wiggle room for them to be better defensively. And if a few things go right with this defense, I think we feel pretty good about what this offense is going to be, where there's going to be weeks where they are by far the best offense, and then there's going to be some weeks where they maybe need to lean on the defense a little bit more in some of those high-profile playoff matchups. But that is where, like, okay, can this be the 12th best defense, keep the score down, and even if you get some frustrating Tua moments and the scheme slows down, I still think this is an offense that can put up 24 points in a tough playoff game. If the defense can keep you alive in that matchup, that can win, right? But as we pull up our Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and those pivotal wild card factors, I think the strengths have been hit home pretty well here. The offensive coaching, the weaponry, and the secondary are all phenomenal here, like top 3 in those regards. But I will just hammer home the wild cards for this team that are going to ultimately, decide in many ways how this team's season goes. It's health in the trenches, man. The left side of the offensive line with Isaiah Wynn and Teron Armstead, can you get them healthy and healthy at the right times? And then especially on the defensive line, that is one of the bigger like wild cards for any of these playoff caliber teams. Is like the Dolphins' range of outcomes for the defensive line is almost entirely dependent on health and recovery from previous injuries. And their range of outcomes is like 32nd defensive line to like 8th. That's a crazy range of outcomes that is just out of our hands in terms of evaluation. It's just health and durability and recovery. And then the defensive coaching is a huge wild card. We think it's going to be pretty solid, but I do think there's a world where they could have it. Weaver could be one of those defensive coordinator hires that's a slam dunk hire. Think of like what Brian Flores did for the Vikings defense. I know that's a name that a lot of Dolphins fans don't want to hear praise of at the moment, but the reality is he took a bad Vikings defense and made it like top 10. I mean, if you get similar type of coaching heroics like that, I think it's a really sound hire. Yeah, that can definitely work for this team in January. Weaknesses, though, it's almost entirely related to the recurring theme on this team of, trench play, and are you overly dependent on the scheme? Is this a team that can actually come out and just win a physical football game in the mud or in the cold. And even if I'm generally positive on this team, I do think that's a real thing. Like, even if things go pretty well for the O-line and the D-line, I think they're pretty soft in the trenches. And I do think there's something to be said about teams figuring out this scheme, and they can't just come out and win a hard-nosed football game. They have to find a way to avoid that script. They have doubled in on the speed, the finesse aspect of this team. They have to find a way, whether that's ensuring that you get home field through the playoffs or being a little bit more conservative with your scheme so that the book isn't out by week 12. Whatever it is, they have to make sure that they can ride this path that they have carved for themselves, the way that they want to win football games. They have to make sure that they're able to win that way in January. But let's take a look at their schedule and decide if that's going to be possible for them. So their over-under is 9.5. They are 12th in Super Bowl odds, which is pretty close to where we have here. But I think a lot of people look at this team and say, yeah, they're a great regular season team, but I'm not betting on them to win the Super Bowl. I think that's mostly fair after what we just said. But they are third for division odds. Honestly, we'll talk about the schedule in a second, but that's where if I had to bet on the Dolphins, I think I'd go with the division odds. I'm not huge on the Bills this year. I definitely think they're better than them. And I mean, the Jets are a total crapshoot. Like, there's a complete world where the Jets just fall apart again. And if that happens, I think this is the best team in the division at plus 240. Like, I actually don't hate that bet at all, because that doesn't even have that much to do with their shortcomings at the end of the season. Like, they could still definitely win this division and disappoint in the playoffs again, right? So maybe I'm even talking myself into that. I might take that plus 240 on the Dolphins, especially as you look at the schedule. Like, I don't think it's horrible. They have 4 games that should be a lock for them. Tennessee at home, a couple of games against New England that they seem like they're really reeling right now heading into the year, and the Raiders at home. I feel pretty good that you got 4 wins there. I think they'll play the Jets and Bills tough. I think they probably split there. That gets them to 6. I think they will also be favored week 1 against the Jags, against a new-look defense that's trying to figure things out. I love the week 1 Dolphins too, because even if McDaniel's trying to hold back a little bit and not blow his whole load on what he came up with in the offseason, even if he holds back a little bit, he's going to throw some stuff at the Jags that they can't handle. So I like them there. You also have a home game against Arizona, a couple of winnable road games at Seattle, at Indianapolis. I mean, I think they could do a lot worse. That's putting them at like 8 or 9 wins, hopefully, before you get into their tough games. At the Rams, at the Packers, at Houston, San Francisco, at Cleveland. I mean, you just got to win one of those 4 tough matchups that they'll be underdogs in. And I think that if my math adds up right, just by going through it, that puts you at about 10 wins. And just from a probability standpoint, my formula did have them coming out as a 10-win football team. And most of these come in pretty conservative. This is more of like, what is my projection on this team have their over-under at? So the TFG over-under is more 10 wins than 9.5. And I do like their regular season outlook, even with the questions on the defensive line. It's just my questions for this Dolphins team are much more tied to like when they get into January with Tua, can they keep going forward? I think we did a good job painting the path for like how that could happen. Not necessarily something I'm betting on, but this team is still very potent and maybe even getting slept on a little bit this year. So it was a fun deep dive. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button if you did. We got 7 more of these bad boys to go. They're going to be coming out pretty much every other day. So wish me luck as we grind through this. Thank you so much for watching. I wouldn't be able to do it without you guys and your enthusiasm for the series. It's good to see the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit, but still going to be a bit of a sprint to get out. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you for watching. Peace out.